Welcome to Not Entirely Unlike Tea with Christine Collins. Hey there, it's Christine Collins, and I have a fun topic today to chat through some reflections about the coexistence of things like science, spirituality, magic, having factual, research-based beliefs, and also leaving some space and room for things that are unexplained. And I thought a fun way to do this would be to put it in the context of a popular TV show that you may or may not have seen, but if you haven't seen it, don't worry, I will give you a little bit of the context of the show. So it's a Paramount Plus show that I actually came across through Netflix. It's called Evil, and the basic premise involves a trio of people who are working specifically for a church as assessors of various situations that arise in order to determine whether or not the church should perform an exorcism. However, it's a little bit more complex than that. So the three people each have a different skill set and a different perspective. And what they are there to assess is whether it is a spiritual issue, a psychological issue, or more of a physiological problem. And one of the things I think is really interesting about the show that kind of drew me in was that there's a presentation of how each issue that they're examining could potentially be spiritual, could potentially be psychological, or something in the environment, something that requires a little bit of scientific investigation and a physiological approach. And each person within the trio represents a different element. One person is a priest, one is a psychologist, and one is a scientist. Now, the show itself does have a bit of a paranormal tint to it, so I'm not necessarily here to present that as being the ultimate truth or anything like that. It really is just to explore how these three different areas might interplay in reality. And a lot of times, the answer reveals aspects of all three areas being potentially covered, so that there's not just necessarily one single aspect that continuously wins out. So sometimes the situation reveals itself with a spiritual nature. They have, like I said, this paranormal tint where there's demons and things like that. But also, there are other moments where there is psychological distress, or where there is something environmental or physiological happening that needs to be investigated scientifically. And sometimes there's an interplay between those different things to an extent that it's difficult to really assess which thing came first. Perhaps the psychological distress caused some of the physiological symptoms, or vice versa, or something in the environment triggered a psychological response, or the spiritual components that interplay with the psychological response. And on some occasions, applying one remedy actually takes care of the other elements, and sometimes not. But the thing that I find the most interesting is that in some cases, all three can be true at once, or could be interpreted through the lens of whoever is looking, even if they're looking at the exact same situation, the exact same person who's in some form of distress. The psychologist sees it through her lens, the priest sees it through his lens, the scientist sees it through his lens. So it's a bit of a more nuanced understanding versus trying to purely distinguish between science and spirituality or magic, for example. Perhaps they can all exist simultaneously, along with probably 10 other dimensions that we don't even know about or haven't even considered. So my question is, what if it's never one or the other, but everything all at once, all the time? It's just an interesting consideration to reflect on, and one that I think is really highly valuable in terms of evaluating our own mindset realm. As we look at tools like hypnosis, for example, there is a sense of it being an emotional support tool. There is a sense of it being highly valuable psychologically, where it does some of the heavy lifting of challenging beliefs at the conscious and subconscious level, which can make it feel magical because it wasn't necessarily something where we had to tediously wade through every ill-begotten thought pattern stemming from every single memory, or dissecting every belief system consciously and logically for hours upon hours. Instead, it delves into the subconscious space where those beliefs are held, and it helps to mold them and change them, making them more pliable, allowing for transformation to happen without so much of that hard effort. And then there's yet another facet to it with the neuroscience behind how this so-called magic actually works. Our brains form neural pathways for how we consistently experience and reinforce our patterns of thought and belief. Where we think the same thoughts over and over, they become deep grooves that are continuously strengthened and reinforced. And then when we want to make a change to that, we want to do something different in our life, we want to achieve a new goal, we want to adopt a new behavior or a new habit, by starting to think new thoughts or look at things in new ways, we decrease the strength and the connection of those old thought patterns, those old behaviors, the old ways of being, and we begin to record new patterns, which are reinforced repeatedly through hearing those hypnotic suggestions in the hypnosis process. And repetition is a major component to building those new neural pathways. It's kind of like when you go over something, with a pen on a piece of paper, you make that line stronger and stronger each time you repeat it. And by hearing the hypnotic suggestions that are centered around your goal, your brain begins to circle around these new thoughts, these new ideas, these new patterns that eventually become new beliefs that we hold and ultimately make decisions with in our lives. And those new neural pathways are built and then reinforced by that repetition. And that can help us to get from consistently thinking and believing things like, I can't do it, I'm not quite educated enough, I don't have enough experience, I'm not quite smart enough or extroverted enough, or I simply can't earn more than X dollars because I've never done it before. Or thoughts like, I'm just someone who never finishes things. I'm just someone who can never achieve that specific goal. I'm just terrible at sales. No one wants to buy from me. And you hear a lot of that all or nothing thinking, those patterns of using words like always, never, no one, that come across as very dramatic, but are actually great signposts that we have some kind of a limiting belief. It's like a structure that we have built our lives and our belief systems around. And because we are living inside of that structure, that paradigm, we continue to operate out of it. We continue to make choices out of it. We continue to live our lives based upon it, whether it's true or not, and whether it's changeable or not. And a lot of times we don't even recognize that it is changeable. It is something we could choose to look at differently, and not just wake up one day and decide to look at it differently, but actually get support through some of these tools to help us to nudge our thinking patterns into a slightly more optimistic pattern, for example. And sometimes we just go through life with these beliefs and we're not even aware at the level at which they are impacting our lives and our choices, and therefore our experiences, the way that we interact with other people, the way that we jump at or turn down opportunities, the way that we capitalize on different things that are given to us or thrown at us. So hypnosis helps to plant some of these new ideas that are intended to be expansive. They are intended to open up horizons. They are intended to help us be more optimistic in the way that we look at the world and in the way that we look at ourselves, to be more hopeful, to be more likely to get you closer towards your goals. And so really in that process, we have a beautiful mixture of it's mindset, it's magic, it's science, it's neuroscience, it's psychology, it's spiritual in many ways. It's kind of this mixture of all of these different components, and depending on how you personally stand in the world and the way that you look at things through your eyes and your perspective may influence the way that you believe it to be useful or helpful to you. But it doesn't really matter, because it's helpful regardless of which stance you're taking or which perspective you're looking at it through. We don't have to keep dividing things into these little separate categories of, oh, that's spiritual woo-woo stuff, or oh no, it's purely strictly science, it's all fact-based. That doesn't mean that they can't coexist together, because the reality is still there. Actually, all of those things can coexist and harmonize together within the same person, within the same situation, or within the same mindset tool that you may be utilizing. And so I just invite you to gently consider these different things, and perhaps consider looking at things from some new and different perspectives, because one of the things that's so powerful is sometimes we have like a little moment, a little epiphany, where someone just says a certain thing, or we hear a new idea that we had never considered before. We hear a little piece of an opinion or a piece of research, and it just expands something within you. And the next thing you know, you start looking at things differently, and you start living differently. You start choosing differently. It might start with one small choice. It might start with what you choose to have for breakfast or not to. It may be something very small, the way that you arrange your space around you and how that influences your mood and your sense of well-being. There are so many little micro decisions that we make, and most of them are on autopilot, but when we have that sort of awakening where we've been given a new idea, we've been given a new concept, we just may start to become more conscious of those micro decisions that ultimately can have a huge impact on the way that we think and do things. And to me, that is the magic. So I hope you found this little reflection to be useful for you. And until we connect the next time, I wish you the most magical and creative rest of your day. Thanks for listening. This is Christine Collins at transformcreate.com.